Hello and welcome to episode number 24 of the Landscape Photography Theme Page Show. And we're here today with an absolutely amazing event. We are going to have Dan Hughes from Google NIK software share a lot of tips and tricks on using the NIK software. I'm Cara Riley, a co-curator of the Landscape Photography Theme Page, small business and consultant and founder of the Photo Tour Global Directory website where consumers connect with photographers from all over the world. We want to thank you all for the absolute amazing photos, almost 400 photos in our event, and this is an exciting time. Google has changed the events, the Hangout on Air events, so we had a mix between the old way of having an event and the new way. So I've posted in the event that you need to be at this link, which is a new event, to be able to watch the show, and I will continue to post that in the feed so that you'll know that you have to connect here. And again, we want to thank you because we've learned from the photos that have been posted in the event how you were using your NIK software, and that really has made it a fun event. So I'm going to introduce each panel member will absolutely introduce themselves, and then we'll get to our show starters that we've selected from the amazing group of photos that you've all posted. And again, thank you so much. So we're going to go right to Jim Worthman, and
thanks, Cara.
Chair.
Yeah, hi everybody, and I'm Jim Worthman. I'm based in Phoenix, Arizona. I'm an amateur, and I especially like landscapes. I do black and white and color, and I contribute to the landscape photography theme as well as the landscape photography community, and curate and moderate those two things. With that, I'll let Tom introduce himself.
Hi, thanks, Jim. I'm Tom Hurl, and I'm an amateur photographer based in Carmel, California. I'm also a curator on the landscape photography theme. And that being said, I'll pass it along to Kevin.
All right. Well, my name's Kevin Rowe, and I'm out of South Jordan, Utah, which is in the Salt Lake Valley. And I'm also an amateur photographer. My favorite thing is to go hiking in the mountains with my camera gear and bring back the photos. And so what we're going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and show you our show starters and get that up. And here is the first one, and I'm sure I'm going to butcher his name, but Masik Pustel, and this is a great photo. This was the one I chose, and he says right in there that he used NIK Color Efex Pro with a skylight filter, Pro Contrast, Dark and Light and Center, and then Viveza 2. So I really liked that one. Great job. And Dan, this is the one you chose. Mm-hmm. You want to just say a couple things about it?
Sure. Yeah. So this was by Diana Boyd. Great photograph. I like the long exposure. You know, the treatment of the water in the exposure itself, and then the treatment and the conversion from color to black and white. It just had a whole lot of depth and dimension to it. You know, coming from the composition as well as the treatment afterwards. And what's wonderful is she saved all the detail in those shadows back in the background as well. I think that that's sort of an important aspect of the image technically to help sort of give it some pop, but you know, full sort of dimension as well.
All right, great. Thanks, Dan. Great shot, Diana. And Tom.
Hi, yes, this is a shot I picked from Rainer Vogeli. I particularly like the detail in the clouds, all the vibrant colors, particularly the red on the rock and contrasting with the blue water and the green grass. So I picked this as my show starter.
All right, great. And Jim.
Right, this is Travis Rhodes, and I love this one. And I got to echo what Cara said with almost 400 photos. Once again, it was really difficult to choose. Some outstanding work, but this one caught my eye. I love the composition, you know, low angle and the leading lines, a bit of a long exposure to give you that silky water. Love the colors. And Travis used HDR Efex Pro, Color Efex Pro, and Vivesa. So quite a combination of NIK plugins used on this image, and I love the results.
Awesome. Thanks, Jim. And Cara?
Just a little delay here as the picture's coming up. Okay, now it's there. This photograph was posted by Tony Hayward, and Tony is from the Blue Mountain area in Australia, New South Wales, Australia, and one of the reasons I picked it was because he was so helpful with what he used on the NIK software, and since this is a NIK software show, I thought it was really important. He started processing with the HDR Efex Pro, and then he used package filters to avoid over-processing. He also used control points around the large tree. So when we do the show notes, the links to all these show starters will be there for you to look and learn from each of the people who participated and really made this event a learning tool. So I'm so delighted that Dan is here to help us learn more about the NIK software.
All right, great. Okay, so we'll get over to Dan, but I just wanted to say a couple things about the show that's coming up first. And I got the Dan came on earlier in the year and did a show with us, and when he did that, I downloaded the trial for NIK software and tried it out, and I bought it, and it's become one of my go-to tools now. I'm a big supporter of it at this point, and I'm sure if you've seen past shows, I talk about how I use quite a few of the NIK plugins. And if you're just new to NIK software, I also recommend you just go into YouTube and search for Dan Hughes, and he has a lot of great tutorials that really can help you out. And hopefully we'll have him back as well again, so he can continue helping us out. But with that, let's go over to you, Dan.
Good. Just before you go, just on that note, the links for the YouTube tutorials and the links for the 14-day trial are on the description of the event, just so you know.
Great. All right, Dan.
Cool. Okay. Well, thank you for the introduction. I really appreciate that, and it's wonderful to see all of those images as well. I was blown away with the quality of all of those photographs that we were looking through. It took me like 45 minutes to actually figure out which image I wanted to choose. And one of the photos that was chosen by Travis Rhodes. He's actually a photographer that I've worked with in the past with NIK software. He's a really knowledgeable guy about NIK stuff, a really great photographer as well, and has supported us with some of his images, and I've used those images in demonstrations too. So it's cool that he got the nod with that share of that photo. Now, I want to get right into the software, but I just want to mention who I am a little bit, and then kind of where we're going and what the software is. So as they mentioned, I'm Dan Hughes. I've been with NIK software since November of 2009, and I've been developing educational content for them since then. So this is sort of one of the things that I really love to do, and I'm really glad I was invited on to the show to get to share some of this cool stuff. We're going to be talking about Color Efex Pro 4. And if there's questions, and I know that there's a couple questions already, I can answer those whenever we see fit.
When you open the Q&A, can you see it now?
It still says it's disabled on mine.
Okay.
So as we get them, you can just filter them over to me, and I can answer them, or whatever's covered.
Okay. Do you see it now?
Let's see.
Up at the top?
Nope. So when I click on the Q&A, and it should come up, it actually says this feature is disabled. So maybe it's something wrong with my connection or something like that. I don't know. But like you said, if you if you can, just sort of filter them over to me, and then I'll answer them as we go.
Okay.
If that works anyways. And I'm going to go ahead and switch over into a screen share. And I want to talk a little bit about what the plugins are for anyone who's maybe not overly familiar. What we're going to be looking at is Color Efex Pro 4 this evening, but we have a whole collection of software that plugs into Photoshop, Lightroom, Photoshop Elements, as well as Aperture, Apple's Aperture. And these tools help to streamline workflow, and a lot of them offer capabilities that you don't have within the host piece of software. So there's tons of stuff in here. We're only going to be able to hit upon a little bit of it from Color Efex Pro 4, but as Cara mentioned, there's tons of training on YouTube. If you go to the NIK Photography Google Plus page, there's tons of training there and free recipes and presets, which we'll talk about those during the demonstration. And then, of course, all of the YouTube videos as well. Now, I'm going to be launching the software from Photoshop, but anything that I do today, you will be able to do whether you launch from Photoshop or Lightroom or Aperture or Photoshop Elements. It doesn't matter. You just have to have one of those host pieces of software for these tools to plug into. And that's why they're called plugins as well, for anyone who might not be familiar. Now, the photo that we're looking at right now is an image by Ken Hubbard. It's a fantastic photograph, and this is the edited photograph. The original image is a fantastic photograph, but you can tell it's a little bit flat. It doesn't have a whole lot of depth to it, but this is what the scene looked like by way of what the camera could capture. And what's really great is that the camera captured all of the information in the highlights and in the shadows. So what we're able to do is go into a piece of software like Color Efex Pro 4 and kind of massage the image and bring out the tones in the different areas where we want to bring them out, and sort of push the viewer's attention maybe towards areas that aren't so important. But just as a quick before and after one more time, again, this is the original image, and then we're going to use Color Efex Pro 4 to sort of balance out the tones and really bring more attention into the center of the photograph. Now I'm going to delete that layer. And for anyone using Lightroom or Aperture, you don't have to worry about layers. And if anyone has questions about that, maybe we can take them offline later on. But Color Efex Pro 4 is a collection of 55 individual filters. We have other tools as well. Hopefully we'll be able to kind of hit upon those. But I want to get into some of the creative and some of the sort of image optimization filters that are within Color Efex Pro 4. The first one is one of my favorite filters, and one that's really important in the software, or I would say is really important. It's called the Detail Extractor filter. And if we look at the before and after, here's the original image, and there's the enhanced image. What this tool does is it actually goes in and tries to find the highest or the brightest tones and the very darkest tones in the image, and then kind of make them a little bit more usable, if you will. And what I mean by that is if I turn off the Detail Extractor filter, the sky up here is really bright and it's distracting. So what it does is it pulls your attention as the viewer away from the stuff that I really want you to focus on. The problem is if I just darken down the clouds, it will look as though I just darkened down the clouds. What I want to do is darken the clouds a little bit, but also add a little bit of contrast to them so that they still look natural and so that they still don't overpower the photograph. In fact, as I turn on the Detail Extractor, this is sort of something that's really important to pull away from the whole demonstration, is that as I go in and adjust the image, sure, it looks really cool that we've applied this Detail Extractor on the entire photograph, right? It's highly transformative, it's a fun effect, but it actually ends up kind of taking away from the whole image if I leave the Detail Extractor, this effect, on the whole photo. So what I want to do is start targeting different portions of the photograph. And in this case, I want to target the clouds so that we're only putting this detail extraction in the clouds. To do that with the NIK plugins, you've got control points. And this is another way that can help to kind of speed along somebody's workflow. In a traditional photo editing workflow, we're typically making selections via, excuse me, via a brush or a lasso or some sort of quick select or a pen tool. These are all sort of tools that are within Photoshop and other photo editing applications. The beauty of these control points is that I can really quickly and really easily make a really nice selection of the clouds so that we get the detail extraction in the clouds but nowhere else on the photo. To do that, I just click the plus button on the right-hand side of the interface, and then I go and just drop a plus control point on the clouds. Now what that does is it goes and it makes the selection of the clouds for us, and it's making that selection based upon the tone, the color, and the texture of the object that we've placed the point on. So we placed it on the clouds. And now when I toggle this detail extraction filter on and off, what you'll notice is that I'm really only affecting the clouds, right? Because that control point went in and made the selection for me. And what's so wonderful about that is now I can kind of go in and dial in the exact amount of the detail extractor so that I can get those tones back, but without affecting the rest of the image. And this is hugely important with photo editing. And that's one of the main advantages of coming on and using a tool that's like this, as opposed to maybe some apps that you'll find within, on your phone, like let's say Instagram, for example, that has some filters in there. They do a great job, but they put the filter on the entire image, and there really isn't too much control. This tool offers you far more control, and it offers something that's even better than that, is that you can grow with the tool. So whether you're kind of just starting out with photo editing or maybe you're an expert, the NIK plugins has something that will help you with your workflow, whether it's these proprietary tools or just a simplified, fast, and powerful workflow. Now, anyways, I kind of gotta go too far with that one. The detail extractor filter looks good in the clouds. We've finished with it. I'm going to click the Add Filter button here on the right-hand side of the interface. That buttons up the detail extractor, and then we move over to the left-hand side of the interface, which is where we have our collection of filters. So right now I have all 55 of my individual filters laid out in alphabetical order. One thing that I want to point out really quickly is that you do have 8 different filter list categories for different kinds of photography. So if you are a nature photographer, you might want to go and click on the nature suggestions, if you will. Right? All of these different filter list categories are suggested filters for these different kinds of shooting. So you can see I have portrait and travel, architecture, wedding, and landscape. You can change that, by the way, by going into the settings. But I don't want to get too far away from this because we don't have too awful much time. So if you want to learn how to do that sort of stuff, you can sort of go over to YouTube and you can find videos that cover all of that stuff as well. For now, I've clicked on landscape. And I'm going to click on the Pro Contrast filter because what I want to do is optimize the image. So the first thing that I did was got that detail back from the clouds because I thought that was the most important thing because it was way too bright. Now I want to balance out the contrast throughout the whole photograph to give it a lot more depth. And you'll see exactly what I mean by depth if you're not overly familiar with that term when dealing with a two-dimensional thing like a photograph here. What you can do with the Pro Contrast filter, and usually with many images you can just use the the correct contrast slider. In this case, I need to use the dynamic contrast slider. And what this is going to do is it's going to go in and find certain tonalities and adjust them at a different rate than if I were to just use the correct contrast. In fact, to cover these 3 sliders, the filter, what it basically does is it allows us to optimize the color and the contrast in the photo. The correct color cast slider basically goes in and finds the color cast, so in this case it was maybe a little bit blue, and as I slide it to the right, it actually warms up the image. It's really subtle in this case, so it's hard to see, but you'll be able to see it a little bit more with these other 2 sliders. The correct contrast slider, as you slide this to the right, what it tries to do is it tries to find all of the tones within the image and optimize the contrast so that we get the most contrast we can, but without losing detail in the shadows, which are the darker tones in the image, or the brighter tones, the highlights. So because the correct contrast slider isn't doing exactly what I want it to do, because it's really kind of darkening down these mountains too much, and I want to brighten them up, but I want to add contrast, I'm going to use the dynamic contrast slider. And what that's going to do is actually find the predominant tonalities in these different sections, and then it adjusts the pixels in a way that's different than the correct contrast. Basically, it says, okay, well, these tones are a bit darker than they should be, so it brightens them up. It's a smart contrast adjustment, basically. So I'm going to dial that down just a touch, bring the correct contrast up just a little bit. And already with these just the two filters, you can see we've got a pretty dramatic difference. That's the bulk of the work, before and after. And I think I've warmed the image a little too much with the correct contrast. From there, we're going to click the Add Filter button. I'm going to move back over to the left-hand side of the interface. This time, I'm going to click on the All tab because the filter that I want to use isn't in the Landscape section. The filter that I want to use is Bleach Bypass. This is one of the more stylistic filters, or at least when you initially click on it, it is. But another sort of point that I really want to drive home is that you'll find maybe 6 to 12 filters in color effects that you will use normally. Then there's other filters that you might use, pretty rarely, and almost nobody uses all 55 of the filters. I think I use maybe 22 of them at the most, and then sort of trickle into other things as I might need them. And that's probably a lot, and it's probably only because I'm always trying to show different filters to people. But the Bleach Bypass filter, and the other point that I want you to take away from this, is that even though when you initially click on one of these filters, it does something really dramatic, it doesn't have to. Right? The idea is that we want to show you what this Bleach Bypass filter is designed to do, but it doesn't mean you have to do that with it. And this rings true with a whole bunch of the different filters, one called Tonal Contrast, specifically. It is a great filter for adding texture, contrast filter, but you can also skin retouch. You can remove texture using tonal contrast as well, but that's sort of a different conversation. Now, I moved into the upper right-hand corner, and what I want to do is just dial back these different adjustments so that I make the Bleach Bypass filter apply to maybe a certain portion of the image, but make it really subtle. And what the tool's going to do for us is, again, give us a great depth. And what I'm seeing as I toggle this on and off is that I don't like it in the reflection in the foreground down here. I don't like it in the clouds so much, but in the mountain range, it does a good job to add that little bit of texture that basically draws the viewer's attention into that area. So for that, again, what we're going to do is use control points. So I'm just going to take plus control points, and I'm going to place them in the areas where I want the effect. Which, by the way, to do that really quickly, you just click the plus control point once, you add the first point onto the object that you want to work with, and then you start duplicating, and to do that you hold the Option button if you're on a Mac, or Alt if you're on a PC. While you're holding Option, you just click and drag. So Option, click and drag, duplicate. Now, if you ever want to see the selection that's being made with these control points, you can actually move over to the right-hand side of the interface, click on the words control points, and then to see exactly where this filter is being applied and where it's not, the easiest way to go about that is to click on the little square that's got the circle in it. So as I click on that little icon, what this is going to show you is anything that's white has this filter effect on it. Anything that's black doesn't have any of the filter effect, and then anything that's gray has some of the filter effect. So I can see that the clouds are being affected a little bit, not nearly as much as our landscape itself, but the clouds are getting a little bit. So what we might do is take a minus control point on the right-hand side, place it up there in the clouds, and then just expand our area of influence out, and what that's going to do is go and clean up that selection for me. Right? So I might even do something like this, and just duplicate the minus control points until I've got the effect exactly where we want it to be. And you can see it makes this mask instantly for us, and it does a fantastic job in creating this precise and clean selection. Now, really quickly, as we toggle this on and off, I still think that the effect is a little bit too strong. So what I'm going to do is go back into our global adjustment sliders, and I'm just going to dial down the local contrast a touch, maybe to 10%. So it's very, very subtle, but what this is again going to help us to do is draw your attention as the viewer in towards the mountain range and the landscape itself. And actually, do any of the panelists here know, this is a pretty famous spot, and I can't remember the name of it.
Maroon Bells, is it?
Yes.
In Colorado?
I think that's what it's called.
Yeah, it's in Colorado.
Yep. It's a beautiful place, and I'm actually kind of embarrassed that I couldn't remember the name of it, but thank you. So to finish this image, because I don't want to spend too much time on one photograph, I've clicked the Add Filter button again, and we're going to use the foliage filter which is another kind of stylistic filter. What this one does is it goes and finds anything that's green and yellow, basically anything that's foliage, and it goes and it enhances that color. So if I toggle the foliage filter at its default settings on and off, it's relatively subtle. Let me just turn that way up to make it a little bit more obvious. You can toggle that on and off. There's the before, there's the after, and you can bring that down, of course, the enhanced foliage slider. This is a strength slider. And you have 3 different colors to choose from for enhancing your foliage. Now, the other thing, and I kind of just missed the mark on this one, being that now we're in December, there's another filter that's called Indian Summer, which does something similar to foliage, but instead of making things more green or changing the color of green, it offers reds and oranges. So you can actually kind of emulate your foliage effects, right? So maybe you're up in Vermont and you're 2 weeks early, or in another spot that might have really beautiful foliage for the fall, and we're a little early. Well, you can kind of go in and fudge that. Or what I tend to do is sort of use it as a creative process and just make something completely off the wall and different. You know, obviously here we've got a lot of sort of conifers and you know, needle trees, not deciduous trees. So I wouldn't want to maybe place it down in here, but it could be interesting to turn one portion of the you know, the greenery red, or change it to yellow, or change it so that it is a different color, and you can kind of start to do that using your control points as well. But I want that foliage filter. I just wanted to show you this one existed. Really a cool one. I'm going to leave it on yellow, this sort of more yellow-green, and I want to toggle that on and off. I think that's getting a little closer to what I wanted, because those colors were a little bit too bluish for me, so I wanted to switch that. And then we're just going to finish this image with a filter that's called Darken, Lighten, Center. And you by no means have to use this many filters on the photograph. You know, here we've got 5. You can use up to 14 filters on an image, and I don't know of anybody who uses 14 filters on an image. It's sort of a large, you know, a big number to use in terms of changing the photograph, but you could if you wanted to. And oftentimes, folks are probably using 2 or 3 filters on an image. In this case, I just wanted to really show you and highlight a couple of the different filters. But if we look at the before and after, we used our detail extractor, pro contrast, bleach bypass, foliage, and darken, lighten, center. This is the before, and there's the after. You can see it's got a lot more depth to it. We're drawing the viewer's attention towards the center, and we've got these wonderful clouds that we've been able to kind of massage a little bit with the detail extractor filter. When we're done, we click the OK button. And actually, before I do that, let's say you really love what you've done here, and you like this stack of filters. Maybe we went off, you know, on a trip and we shot a whole bunch of images in this park, and we wanted to have a consistent sort of grouping of filters so that the look is the same and consistent throughout all of the images. You can save this stack as a preset, and that's called a recipe here within Color Efex Pro 4. To do that, you just click Save Recipe on the right-hand side, name the recipe. So I'm going to name this one Ken Hubbard. And I just go Ken Hubbard image. And this is a photo by Ken Hubbard, by the way, who great guy. He's a Tamron representative and does all sorts of cool workshops and stuff. He's on Google Plus as well. He might be an interesting one to check out. But as I click that Save Recipe button, I've now saved it into my recipes. So the next time I want to use this stack of filters, all I've got to do is launch the software, click on that button, and it gives me this, which is a nice way of working, because then I don't even have to remember that I used this stack of filters. I just have to remember that this is the preset. In fact, naming it this probably isn't a very good idea. Here, I'm going to click the OK button in the lower right-hand corner. By naming it Ken Hubbard image, it's not really telling me what the thing is doing, so it might be smart to have a better naming convention than that. But as you can see, just using color effects, we've been able to really transform the photograph to something that's got a lot more depth to it. And using those control points. The selective editing capability is hugely important. Oop, that's not the image I wanted. Okay.
So, Dan, would you be able to answer a few of the questions? I put them in the comments.
Sure.
Or for the private message there. A few of the people have been asking and are in the events looking for answers.
Okay. Sure, yeah. I've got all of them. Let's see if I can discern which one's which. So the first question, I would be curious to hear about the future development plans of Viveza. Would be nice to have some of the controls that you've got, like within Silver Efex Pro, like the history state browser. And that's a great question. So I don't know too much of what or when things will be developed, but I can say just from previous experience, from having one version go to the next, let's say Silver Efex 1 to Silver Efex 2, or Color Efex 3 to Color Efex 4, for example, those things that you're talking about, the history state browser, those kinds of interface things, and those capabilities in that we would want to sort of extend the tools that you have, because within Silver Efex you have a lot more contrast controls than what you have within Viveza. I would expect that those kinds of things would be in Viveza 2, or I'm sorry, in Viveza 3, you know, if and when it gets developed. But like I said, I don't know if or when that will be developed, because, you know, they sort of keep me in the dark because I'm sort of a public person, and so rather than having me say I don't know, rather than having me say I don't know and I do know, they just don't let me know, and then I'm honest when I'm saying I don't know. So the next question, when and or if you use raw pre-sharpener. Oh, okay, great question. So there's in Sharpener Pro, and by the way, for anyone who's not familiar with Viveza, Viveza 2 is for editing light and color, and it has those kinds of control points, or it has control points inside of it, similar to what you had within Color Efex. The difference is that you have a whole tree of different adjustment sliders. Brightness, contrast, saturation, structure, all can be controlled within control points in Viveza 2. Whereas Color Efex, the control points make selections the same way, but work a little bit differently. Not to sort of try to confuse anybody, but Sharpener Pro, the next question was in regards to the raw pre-sharpener. You guys can see my screen right now, correct?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So there's two sort of modules or tools within Sharpener Pro 3. The first one is the raw pre-sharpener, which is designed to take the place of the raw sharpening or input sharpening that you might do within Adobe Camera Raw, or within Lightroom's develop module, or within Aperture has a sharpen section in the raw processing area. This would take the place of that. Now the question was, when do you use that? And I'll answer it two ways. The first way is that you would use it in place of the raw pre-sharpener and towards the very beginning of your workflow, once you're done with the rest of your raw processing. And then a second way for me to answer that is, when do I use it? And that is, I don't use it very often unless I need very selective sharpening. The thing about Adobe Camera Raw and Lightroom's sharpening algorithms is that they're really, really, really good. They've done a really nice job to upgrade those, especially from Lightroom 4 to Lightroom 5. It seems to be different, or I guess the new version of Adobe Camera Raw. And the benefit of using the raw pre-sharpener from Sharpener Pro is that you have control points, and you have a slightly different algorithm. Well, it's a very different algorithm that's actually doing the sharpening, so it gives you a different quality, different look. So I guess that's, hopefully will answer that question. And just for anyone who's not familiar, the output sharpener from Sharpener Pro 3.0 is used at the very end of the workflow, and it's used for a particular kind of output. Because if you're printing an image on an inkjet printer, you need a different amount and kind of sharpening than if you're sending it off to a lab, and that's a different amount and kind of sharpening that you would do if you're putting the image up on the internet. So that's what you'd use the output sharpener for. All right, so let me just jump back into that screen share. I don't know why I had to go into that just to answer that question. Let's see. Question 3. I'd like to know more about the paint aspect. Okay, I can show that one. So there's a brush capability. I'll show that once we get back into the demonstration portion. Just if I forget towards the end, Kevin or Jim or Kara, or just remind me to show you that. Yeah. Now, question 5, I use Lightroom, Photoshop, and the NIK plugins. Do you recommend using noise reduction prior to sending an image to HDR Efex Pro? Yes. I would suggest, if you have noise in your images, which there always is a little bit, use noise reduction first. and then go in and merge the images. Now, that said, it's not going to destroy your photograph to merge the images into HDR, Efex Pro, and then do noise reduction after. It's just the benefit of doing noise reduction beforehand is then it doesn't get sort of exaggerated when you're creating the high dynamic range image. So if you get rid of it first, you don't have to worry about it later. All right. Let's see here. Here, I'll lose track. So question 6. How do you find the box if you're using? So I see. The question is in regards to finding the plugins when you're using Lightroom, because when we're here in Photoshop, what you'll notice is that I have this NIK selective tool to access the tools. But if I open up Lightroom right now, and I apologize, on this computer I have Lightroom 4. I didn't update it to 5, and it's probably going to yell at me because I haven't used Lightroom on this computer in a while. To find the NIK plugins from Lightroom, you don't have the NIK selective tool. You have basically the ability to right-click on the image and then go to Edit In, and it will give you a list of the different plugins that you have installed. So here you can access color effects from right-clicking, going to Edit In, or if you're in the Develop module, I think you can go up to Edit. I can't remember exactly where it is. I tend to work with the NIK plugins from Photoshop because of that brush capability and the layer masking capability and blending modes. And there's other things that you can get. Oops, that's the wrong screen. There's other things that you can get from using the NIK collection in Photoshop. Not necessarily inside of the NIK plugins, but there are capabilities in Photoshop that are sort of good or nice to use. Question 7. Can you stack the same filters like Detail Extractor with different control points to have different levels of effect? That's a fantastic question. Yes, and I highly suggest that, and we're going to actually take a look at how to do that with the next image. Great question. And then the last question here, I usually use remove chromatic aberration and sensor spots before enhancing my photos. Does color effects start with an image data after the pre-processing? Oh, okay. So this photographer uses these different tools within the raw process first to get rid of chromatic aberrations and lens distortions and so on. Yes, if you do that, you will then open your image up into the NIK plugins, and if you're using it from Photoshop, anything you did with an Adobe Camera Raw will automatically be applied to the image you've opened into Photoshop. If you're using Lightroom, what you have to do when you access the software is actually click on, here I'll show you, you have to click on something slightly different. You have to edit the copy, meaning, here I'll hit F here, if I right click, go to Edit In, Color Efex Pro 4. If I do stuff to the raw image within the Develop module of Lightroom, and I want those things to be reflected in the image that we open up into Color Effects, I have to make sure that I edit a copy with the Lightroom adjustments on it. If you've got a raw file, this is the only option it will let you work with. So that's okay. It'll just be good and golden for everyone. This file, I think, is a JPEG or a PSD, so it gives me a few other options. But with the raw file, you'll just edit a copy with Lightroom adjustments, and it will reflect anything you've done within Lightroom. Good question. All right, so back to my screen share. There we go. And
I think there were just maybe 2 more there. If you just look in the instant messages.
Yep. So question 8 is how do you decide which order to stack the filters? That's almost totally subjective. You know, there's sort of a couple little rules that I'll show you, but if you use Detail Extractor as the 3rd filter in your stack instead of the 1st filter in your stack, you'll actually get something a little bit different. So ordering the filters in a different way will change the effect of your image. But I don't have a good recommendation because it's more of a subjective thing. It's up to you as the artist to say, I like using this one, you know, this filter, let's say tonal contrast first, as opposed to using it as the 4th filter. I'll show you what it looks like as changing those orders go as well. The last question, right here, at least so far, oh, never mind. You have Photoshop CC. Oh, so in Photoshop CC, you should have the NIK selective tool. So you should have, let me just quit Lightroom. You should have this, If you don't have this NIK selective tool showing up in your Adobe Photoshop CC, you might or you should have it also in the filter drop-down menu. So you go up to filter, down to NIK software, or NIK collection rather, and you should have them listed out there. If it's not showing up in there, it means it's not properly installed, and therefore you'll want to either reinstall the software or you'll want to contact our customer support team. Oh, and I don't think my screen was sharing at that time, so I didn't even see it. Sorry. All right, so you should have this if you're in Adobe Photoshop CC. If you don't, you'll find it here by clicking on the filter drop-down menu, and it should be listed out there. If it's not in either of those places, it's not properly installed, and therefore you'll want to reinstall. That's the first step. If that doesn't work, you contact customer support, and you can do that by just going to the NIK software website, and there's a support link. You'll be able to either talk to them via the telephone or email them, either way. Great questions. So a couple questions that I didn't answer yet was the brush capability, and then the other one was stacking or using the filters in a particular order. So let's cover those things, and just to sort of point out, I'm actually using more than one piece of software from the NIK collection in this image. How are we doing on time?
We have about 10, 12 minutes left,
okay.
And then we do our photographers to watch.
Okay, stop me because I will just keep going.
Okay.
All right, so first off, I use the detail extractor alone, on its own, in this image. And I wanted to do that just in the foreground, because what I wanted to do was kind of equal out or use that tool to brighten up these foreground elements, knowing that I was then going to go into Viveza 2 for editing more of the color. Now, the reason I wanted to use Viveza 2 for editing the color, or at least editing the color the way that I did here, is because the control points that you have in Viveza 2 have red, green, blue, hue, and saturation controls built into each control point, and that offers me independent color control over each of the different aspects in the image. Literally, I can drop a control point here and add more warmth and more red to it to sort of bring out the color here, and then I can place a control point in here and I can cool down and add blue and cyan. So I can control those different aspects very quickly and easily using Viveza 2. Then, using color effects, I'm going to show you A, answer the questions we had come in, and then B, I want to show you some color control filters, or one in particular that can be really powerful, and why I might want to use that. And that's basically all we're going to do with Efex Pro 4 on this image. So I've deleted that layer. I'm going to move into color effects, and we're going to open up into the software. It's going to launch into the detail extractor filter. It's going to do that because it was the first filter I used the last time I opened up the software. And the software does that because it thinks that I probably want to use this filter again. It's not true in this case. I don't need to use detail extractor because I had done it before on a different layer. So I'm going to go ahead and just delete the detail extractor filter by clicking the X that's to the right of that label, and it gets rid of it. Then we're going to move over to the left-hand side. You can see here's a group of my recipes, my presets. Here's the Ken Hubbard image. So the preset that we just created on the previous photograph, if I click on it, I can click yes, and notice what it's done. It's taken all of those filters that I used on the other image, and it's applied them exactly the same way on this photo. So that's really cool. I don't want to do that, so I'm going to move into my history state browser in the lower left-hand corner, which, by the way, just records everything that we do while we're within Efex Pro 4, and I'm just going to go back one step to the detail extractor being removed. So I'm just undoing, if you will. And there's a shortcut for that as well. If you use Command-Z on a Mac or Control-Z on a PC, you can undo. It's definitely a fast and convenient shortcut to know. Now, brilliance and warmth. This is the filter that I wanted to talk about. We're going to use it twice on this image, and we're going to use it in a way that sort of references the question that we had. That is, can you use one image multiple times but using control points to sort of separate out the effects? And yes, you can do that. In fact, what I want to do is take this perceptual saturation slider up into the right, which is going to add saturation to the image, but it does so in a way that's different than a standard saturation slider. Right? A standard saturation slider simply takes the vibrancy of the color and makes it more vibrant. And it's fantastic, and it's a tool that needs to be in here. But the perceptual saturation slider works in a way that's much closer to the way the human eye sees and reacts to color. Meaning the human eye reacts to color in relationships to surrounding tones and colors of a particular object. Meaning, let's say this color of the boat, or the little fishing boat as it looks like here, is exactly the same as this color in the sunset. It's not, but just bear with me. Because this color in the sunset is surrounded by more warmth and other clouds here, it's going to get a certain kind and amount of saturation and hue adjustment. And that's going to be different than this area because of the surrounding areas. So basically, this is a tool that only exists within Color Efex Pro 4, and it allows us to control the color in a way that's much closer to the way the human eye sees. And the benefit of that is that I can go and increase the amount of saturation, but it still looks very natural. And that's my goal in this case. Now what I want to do is use that perceptual saturation slider. I'm going to go ahead and take my warmth slider to the left, so I'm cooling the image down. But when I do this, I only want to cool the cooler parts of the photograph, meaning the stuff that's blue and green, maybe, I want to make more blue and more green, but I don't want the things that are orange and red and yellow to have that same effect. So what I'll do with this filter is just take minus control points and start removing it from any of the colors that I want to retain the warmth of. And I can do this very quickly and easily by just duplicating control points. Right, so it's Option, click, and drag. And if I needed to, I could even go in and take a look at the selections that were being made, by going into control points and clicking on this little doohickey, and it's going to show me exactly where we're putting the effect and where we're not. So we're putting the effect, again, only in the cooler tones. And we could do this with Detail Extractor or anything we might want to. It will work the same way. So I'm going to actually just take a minus control point and remove it from the trees in the foreground right there. Now, let's take a look at the before and after. There's the before, there's the after. So we've got this nice punch of color. Maybe it's a little more than we even need, so I'll dial it down. Then we click the Add Filter button. I go back over to the left, click on Brilliance and Warmth. This time, as we increase the perceptual saturation, I'm going to warm the warmth slider. I'm going to slide to the right. And now this time, I'm just going to take plus control points and very quickly place them in the areas where I want the warming effect. And I might take minus control points and place the minus control points in the areas where we don't want the warming effect. So anything that should be cooler, like the blues of the clouds and the reflections in the mountain range, I'm going to take minus control points and make sure that we're not affecting that with this brilliance and warmth. And what we get out of this is this custom algorithm, right, the perceptual saturation slider, applied two different ways, but exactly where we want it to be. And it creates this really wonderful punch to the color. Right? We're really not adjusting the luminosity, the density in the image. We're primarily adjusting the color with these adjustments, but yet we get this really wonderful kind of punch overall to the photo. To finish this one, I'm just going to finish with the darken, light, and center filter. It just tends to give you this really wonderful kind of tunnel vision. If there, because this image, I want to sort of draw your attention towards the middle again. So I'm going to go ahead and finish with this darken, light, and center. It does a really great job to sort of subtly just direct the viewer. If we take a quick look at that before and after one more time, that's using brilliance and warmth twice, and then darken, light, and center. There's the before. There's the after. And I'm going to click the OK button. Let that apply. We're going to open back up into Color Efex Pro 4 one more time. This should only take about a minute or so. I want to show you that brush capability because we did have a question about it. And what the brush tool allows you to do, you can see it in the lower right-hand corner here. It allows you to brush the effect in exactly where you want it to be. Now what's cool about that is that you can start off points so that you get the effect where you want it to be, and then using a layer mask in Photoshop with that brush tool, and it generates that for you. You can brush it at whatever percentage you might want, or at whatever rate, and so on. So, boy, that's funny. My left-hand side of the interface isn't loading properly, and definitely not good. So let's say I want to apply cross-processing, for example. Let's say I love that, but I really only want it in the warm tones. I'm going to take a plus control point, I'm going to place it in here, and then I'm going to duplicate that control point, duplicate it again, and then rather than, and I'm just going to make this really a strong cross-processing, much too strong probably, but I'm going to click the brush button instead of clicking OK. And as I click the brush button, the same thing happens for Photoshop users, which, by the way, the brush tool, it's only within the Photoshop version of the software. It's not within the Lightroom or Aperture version because of the fact that in Photoshop we're dealing with layers and layer masks. So you'll only find it there. Now, I clicked the brush button, and the exact same thing happened as the last time we used color effects, in that the background is duplicated and the filter's applied. But now we have this black mask that's to the right of our layer of pixels here within the layers palette. And what that black mask does is it hides everything. It conceals all of the image, or all of those pixels, I should say. So what we can then do is, using that layer mask, using the tools in the NIK selective tool, we can control exactly where we're putting the effect that we just used. You do that by either clicking Fill to fill the effect in, and you can see my my black layer mask turned white, so now I'm revealing everything. And then I can erase stuff, so I click Fill and then Erase, and I can erase it out. Or I can click Clear, and then I can click Paint, and then I can just simply use my my Wacom tablet or my mouse, if I'm not using a tablet, to just brush the effect in exactly where I want it to be. And because I started with the control points, it makes it for a much easier process, because I don't have to be really careful about my brush tool, for the simple fact that the control point already made the initial selection. So now I'm just applying that cross-processing filter right in here, instead of maybe out here where the control point was putting a little bit of it. And that's using the brush capability, and that's built into basically all of the NIK plugins. It's not within the HDR Efex Pro 2 within Photoshop, because of the fact that you're making a whole new file when you're using HDR Efex Pro 2. But that's Color Efex Pro 4 in a quick nutshell. I'll head back over to the screen share. Let's see if I can find my window. There we go. Any more questions come in? Are you guys blown away?
We are. We're totally blown away.
Yeah,
Cool.
I had one quick question, Dan. The dark and light and center filter.
Sure.
How does that compare with the vignette that's available in some tools?
Great question. Well, I can show you the difference. So the dark and light and center. Let me start that screen share, and let's go to a different photo. I think I've got one more open. So let's see what I got here. I'll leave that one on there. The dark and light and center filter gives you a slightly different kind of control. What it's going to do automatically is brighten the center of the image about 25%, and then there's this really kind of soft gradient where, here, if I go and click on dark and light and center, and I bring my center luminosity all the way to the right, you can see I've brightened the center, and I bring my border luminosity all the way down. It has this really nice sort of subtle transition from the center that's being brightened and the border that's being darkened. Excuse me. The difference is that brightening of the center and the gradient of the center, because if I go and click on like the lens vignette filter instead of dark and light and center, what this does is it offers me the ability to darken down the edges, but it doesn't brighten the center, and then I have some slightly different controls. The biggest difference is that the dark and light and center tends to look like a sort of sleight of eye trick. It doesn't look like it's been added in post-processing, whereas the vignette tool, you can generally tell that it's been added in post. And oftentimes that's appropriate, but most of the time I find myself gravitating towards dark and light and center because it's a little more subtle.
Good. Thank you.
No problem. Good
Hey,
question.
I have one other question, Dan. So
Sure.
when we were going through the brush, and maybe I'm missing something, but is there any advantage to using the brush versus just clicking OK and then creating a new mask and brushing it in yourself?
It's exactly the same thing.
Okay.
The only difference is that you have the paint and erase button over here. And really, for anyone who's pretty familiar using layer masking, do that. If using layer masks is brand new to you and you've never heard of it, this is a good way to learn how to use it, because what it's going to do is sort of streamlined the process of creating a layer mask and then inverting that layer mask if it's needed, and then being able to brush in or brush out using black or white, on the layer mask.
Mm-hmm.
Great. That's what I thought, but I'm kind of dense sometimes, so I wanted to make sure.
Most definitely, yeah. Cool. Do we have any more questions that came in?
I think there were a few. If you just look in the instant messages there.
Okay. Let's see here. Oh, question 10. By the way, in Lightroom you access HDR. That's a good point. So one of the things that was mentioned in the question was that in Lightroom, to access HDR Efex Pro 2, you don't find it in Edit In, you find it in Export, right? And you export to HDR Efex Pro 2.
Great.
So that was another point that was made in the questions, and that's a really good point for anyone who's using Lightroom. Let's see here. I think that's all the.
One other thing I see there is, I'm assuming he's asking, are there brush capability in Photoshop Elements?
Oh, yes. And it should work the same way as what we were just talking about. You'll hit the brush button, and then you should have within the NIK selective tool the same capabilities: the paint, the erase, the fill, and the clear. Yeah. When you click OK or Apply in the Photoshop Elements version, I think what happens there is a little bit different than what's happening in Photoshop, but you do still have that capability as an Elements user. Yep.
So,
I think that's all of them.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Dan. It really is great learning. I know the first time you were on, I didn't even realize that it was a plug-in software. So I really now realize, and yes, I signed up for Photoshop, the cloud at $9.99. It's affordable for anybody, but all of the photographers that really are making amazing images basically start with the NIK software. So we really appreciate you coming and sharing. And now I'm going to turn this over to Jim Worthman, who has a compilation of photos of our photographers to watch.
Thanks, Cara. Let me share my screen. See, did it share? Okay.
Yes.
So I'll start with my photographer to watch is Dennis Newberth. He's an amateur photographer, lives in Baden-Baden, Germany. And if you look through his stream, almost all of his work is his own, and it's just beautiful landscapes from Germany and other areas in Europe. It's gorgeous work. I hope you'll look through his stream, and if you like what you see, definitely good person to add to your circles. And let's see, next up, Dan, your choice.
Yeah, so this is Matthias. At least I'm pretty sure that's how I pronounce his name. Matthias Schroeder, I believe. But he's got some really wonderful color and black and white work. I'm always drawn to this sort of full range of contrast, and the ultra long exposure stuff is quite beautiful and has a surreal feel to it. So this is one of his more recent images, and he's got some really cool sort of urban landscape and some sort of landscape like this that is not urban, obviously, but his use of line, his wonderful sort of anticipation as to what's going to happen, because when shooting these ultra long exposures, shooting at 60 seconds gives you something that's totally different than shooting at a half a second, but that's totally different than at 4 minutes, let's say. And he does a really great job of sort of knowing the cloud movement or spending enough time and getting really some gorgeous photos out of it that just resonate with me anyways. But great shooter, and he's got some cool stuff.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, Kevin.
Yeah, so this is Ken Cannon, and Ken's in Oregon and has a lot of really great ocean, seascapes, and some other great landscapes as well. Go ahead and show the next one there, Jim. Just wanted to point out this one was actually featured in last month's Best of the Best Landscape Photography slideshow, and so that one's another great seascape. And check Ken out. He only has about 2,000 followers, and he's worth following.
Definitely. Thanks. Okay, Cara.
All right, we're going to Italy here, northern Italy, and this is Tommaso de Donato, and of course this is Venice, and he's really got the light here, the contrast, really draws us in with this particular photo. He is an amazing guy to watch because he really is a globetrotter. He's posting pictures from Venice and arches and the Antelope Canyon. So he just is all over the place with his landscape, and a wonderful guy. Lots of fun to talk to. And here's one of his long exposures with the sun there. So we'll be creating the circle with all of these photographers. Thank you, Jim.
Okay, Tom.
Well, I picked a fellow from Germany, Patrick Zeiler, who I believe does software development, and he says he does photography for pleasure, so I can identify with that. Two of the shots I've picked are some of his night photography. The first one here is star trails, and the second shot is, you can switch to that, is also a night photography shot with the first, I thought this was almost drawn, but it's actually a radio antenna, you know, with a lot of stars and interesting color lights. But he does quite a lot of night photography. Very good work. He also does other photography. Doesn't do entirely night photography, but I think he's well worth following. So
Definitely. Okay, thanks, Tom. And I think that's it. And I wanted to thank Dan for joining us tonight, and it was another great show. But one thing I noticed, you said that Color Efex Pro has, what, 55 filters?
Yep.
And I think you really delved into about 5 of them tonight. So I think we can have back about 11 more times.
That's right.
All right.
Well, thank you so much, Dan. I know we had a lot of people on the event, over 320 people saying they were coming and can watch when it's recorded, and almost another 250 that were maybe. So we had a lot of interest, and we will be creating a circle with everyone who participates in our events, and we'll be creating our show notes that will have links to the show starters and the photographers to watch, and also to the 14-day trial for the NIK software and the YouTube link where you can learn all about NIK software. So our next show, now Jim and Margaret are going to be having a New Year's party on December 31st. I think some surprises, and so it should be a fun show. We'll be posting that soon. And then the 26th show, our anniversary show, will be January 13th, and we'll be starting out the new year with equipment that we'd like to share and learn about. So thank you so much for joining us this evening. Watch for our show notes, and you have a great week.
Real quick, Cara.
Yes.
Just real quick, just on behalf of all the curators at the Landscape Photography Theme, I just want to wish everyone a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays, and we appreciate all the photos that you share and love looking at them, and thanks a lot.
Okay.
Definitely.
So from all of us, and we'll be signing off. Thanks, and you be safe over the holidays, and hug your neighbor. Bye-bye.
Good night, everybody.
bye.